Before I start, just audible.
Yes, you're audible.
Yep, awesome. Okay, let me just get my timer. Okay. Oh, video. Oh, okay. Oh, so dark. Seriously. Yeah. Okay. So without further ado, POIs in verbally. If in the chat I probably not see it, there's a bit of a glitch here. I probably can't see it, so just give me verbal POIs. And yep, I think that's about it. Without further ado, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, quick reclarification on the motion here. It says that what is in the best in it, the motion asks you the very simple question: what is in the best interest of incumbents of right-wing politicians in Europe? What OG seems to think is the best interest, according to them, for these people is apparently getting sanctioned by the US, being strong armed into doing the same taxes, doing the same policies as the US. Otherwise, they'll get sanctioned. And somehow this is the best interest. We think that this just simply fails the vibe check, and we'll tell you some more analytical reasons as to why it's untrue at the end of the day. First, a few points of characterization. First of all, this is going to be like an active motion. We're talking about what is probably best for the right-wing incumbents in Europe specifically here, that being the EU. And what we think that is in their best interest is number one, to be re-elected, because these are politicians. They obviously want to stay in power. These are the jobs that they love, and they probably don't want to be replaced in the first place. So before I move on to argumentation, then a few points of rebuttal here. Two strategic observations before that. OG concedes two very important things. Number one, that Trump is very far right, and number two, Europe is not very far right. So, how does this actually not work out in their favor then? In that case, if the incumbents in this scenario are not as far right as Trump, and Trump is extremely far right, does this not then motivate like other politicians, not motivate, does this not then garner more support for other politicians who are more radical to actually replace these incumbents? That's to say, people who were already radical in the first place, people who are not identified as being part of the previous administration. Therefore, these are people who are more likely to actually benefit from the election of Trump, because of the fact that now people see like, oh, Trump is in office, so therefore there's something that is quite good. So this is why this concession is so important, because they concede two very important things: that Trump is very far right and Europe isn't. If Europe currently isn't, that means the incumbents are also not as far right in the first place. Second point of rebuttal then. OG wants to tell you about how it is somehow their interest to be, like I mentioned just now, to be
Of
sanctioned, to do the
CPI.
taxes and everything and so forth. Well, we say that, yeah, number one, it's not true, it's not good to be sanctioned, that's not something good. And number two, being strong armed to get your country's sovereignty be taken away, like your right to self-govern, the fact that you want to do a certain policy, but you can't do that because otherwise you could be sanctioned. We don't think that's a good thing for your country, for you. And in that case, you actually gain even more hatred for your people because of the fact that you being forced to follow these policies that are not seen as favorable to your country at all in the first place. Before that, I'll take that POI.
We have to take into consideration the reason why EU is getting the right wing in the EU is rising. It is because the people in the EU is very tired with the radical left wing, and they choose to vote for another party. That's why the right wing is rising.
Awesome. That leads me to my argument straight up. First argumentation here is about how the people who are the incumbents here will actually lose the election and be replaced by people who are more radical. Yes, you are correct when you say that the world is getting more right wing, especially the EU. However, that's the world becoming more right wing. The people who are going to be replaced are the incumbents, the people who are our stakeholders in this motion. Like, bro, these people, they are not as right wing as the people currently want them to be. So therefore, it's more likely than not for these people to actually be replaced in the first place. Then, five layers of analysis as to why these people actually lose the election then. Number one, Trump is radical. OG concedes this, but here's the proof for it. Number one, you can see like all the news headlines and everything, Trump saying he'll like, I don't know, bomb Gaza or something. I don't know what the fuck he said. Like all the weird shit that he said lah. And also the fact that he wants to like get rid of DEI. He wants to invade Canada. He wants to invade Greenland lah. I don't know. The guy is crazy. He's done a lot of things that are clearly radical, So second layer of analysis, Europe is not that radical. Number one, Europe has not declared war on Canada. Number two, Europe in general, like their leaders are not like that right wing. I.e., for example, let's say the UK lah. For example, Boris being changed to Sunak to Starmer, like these are conservative people, but they're not radical per se. That's to say that in general, people are not like super right wing in Europe. People are generally centrist, and people are generally like not radical right wing. That's to say that that's not the norm there. That's to say that in the event that Trump was to be elected, the more radical part of right wingers, they get more emboldened, they get more support. It is seen as something that is more acceptable. Third layer of analysis: why can't these politicians then adapt? OG might come up to you and say, "Oh, if it is true that people want more right wing policies, why can't the old guard just simply adapt?" Number one, they are more likely to not have the same trust of the people as before. That's to say that they compare two politicians. The first politician has been in power for the past 20 years, and he says to you, "Oh, next year I'm going to change. I'm going to be super right, super radical, super right wing, and everything." Versus candidate B, who is a young kid, who's someone who's new to the scene, and he says to you, "No, I'm not like those like Washington elite. I'm actually going to go out there and actually be right wing." Who are you going to trust? A person who has a history of being part of the previous administration, which is not that right wing, or a new person who is able to promise you more things? Then it's quite obvious who actually gets the thing then. Fourth layer of analysis: why is it that this Trump election actually affects the elections in Europe then? Because number one, global perception. That's to say, like the Overton window is a big word. It basically just means that this version of right wing becomes more acceptable. I.e., if radical right wing becomes more acceptable, lesser right wing also becomes even more acceptable then, because of the fact that US is a whole country, it's really popular and everything, and so forth. Also, the fact that if you notice, Kamala Harris is actually not that left wing as she seems in the first place. That's to say that she's actually like quite similar in right winginess to people to the current incumbents in Europe per se. That's to say that, like, if you know this thing, she actually got called up by Bernie Sanders after the election for leaving like your average worker, and the Bernie Sanders said like, "Oh, no wonder the workers also left you when it came time to vote." Then that's to say that she isn't actually as left wing as the media tries to portray to you, which shows that radical right wing is a new in thing here, and it shows that the voters' rejection of Kamala is similar to the voters' rejection of the current incumbents in in Europe. Then fifth layer of analysis: even if the old guy is able to adapt, the incumbents are able to adapt and create more radical policies. Well, that's not really a good thing, because number one, more radical policies get you more hate, and number two, more hate means that more people are more likely to do bad shit against you. Like, look at what Luigi did and how everyone's cheering him on. So all of those things just point to the fact that even if they were able to change their policies, it's probably not best for them then. So it's very intuitive then. Trump gets elected, they don't need to do this. If Trump didn't get elected, they did not need to do this, and so forth. In fact, they get replaced. Very simple.
Yeah. Thank you for that speech. Calling on DPM. Here.
All right, am I audible?
Loud and clear.
Yes, I'm taking BLI in the chat. Please type the name of your team. For example, like just type OOCL, so I will know which team to receive the BLI.
Can I be heard?
I don't recall.
That's all right. It's me recording anyway. All right, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Opening government and possibly closing government are out of this debate when their path to victory assumes a simple equation: that the same political stance would favor other people with similar stances. If that was really the case, then it would have been intuitively a government win automatically, which didn't require any form of proof on this side of government. But realize this, that their own analysis belies their own burden of proof to prove as to why is it that similar stances would favor other people with similar stances. As the same reason as to why is it that people who are radical likely are going to cause problems even internally with the people who share the same beliefs, likely are going to cause the same issues between countries, especially the EU and America, especially considering the extent to which America is likely going to cause issues towards other countries, especially countries that even even towards neighboring countries, and furthermore towards countries that may also then affect his position within the future, especially considering that the EU is the size to which EU is currently in. We believe as though Trump's inability for him to be able to trust things like the EU is likely going to cause more problems in the long term. And this is something that's likely to happen, and we don't want that form of risk to essentially occur. And the reason to why is that risk is something that we're not willing to take, ladies and gentlemen, is simply because of the same reasons that Emir already told you, to very little to no response on the side of opening government. Note, ladies and gentlemen, that we've never told you that Trump was left-wing in any way whatsoever. We considered the extent to which Trump was already right-wing is one to which is radical and extreme. We told you that the EU politicians are not that extreme to the of the right-wing spectrum, and likely falls more towards the views that were shared between Kamala Harris, or for instance, even if it's right wing, it isn't to the degree to which Trump's new policies and likely going to push towards Project 2025 is likely going to create. We don't want this to be, we don't believe that these two are tantamount to each other, and they don't share the same extent towards these towards their political stances align with each other. Even if they did align, we don't think that this is something that automatically means that it is in the best interest that it essentially occurs. The next thing that I want to ask, two questions I'm going to ask in this debate. First is in terms of Trump's protectionist policies, and secondly is in terms of Trump blocking out of the WHO and climate change efforts. What will happen? First, on Trump protectionist policies, government seems to claim as to the protectionist policies that Trump introduces would mean that that Trump no longer believes in the open market, which means that the EU will find other ways to then develop economically, which buttresses the entire point of having similar political stances and having a political stance that is different than that of, for instance, the Liberal or the Labour Party. All this kind of does is also then prove the non-linear approach that most individuals take when they look into the right-wing political spectrum. It means that there's different views that people then take into consideration of that mean that that shows different levels to which an individual is essentially believing in the right-wing political spectrum. But we believe as though this we're going to flip the case then, that the Trump protectionist policies actually is not in the interest of the of the European incumbents at all. First piece of analysis here is to note the word incumbents in the motion, because the word incumbents in the motion means that these are people from the previous administration that were voted in prior to Trump coming in, which means that they are likely going to go through another form of election after the world, as the government concedes, is likely going to move towards and shift towards a more right-wing view. Why is it that Trump's protectionist policies is still then going to be harmful, especially towards his incumbents? Three things. First is the extent to protectionist policies that Trump has introduced before. If he is able to introduce sanctions towards Canada and wage war against countries like Mexico, we believe that these are already the extent to which they can impose things like protectionist policies towards European countries. And this is bad, because this allows them from being able to continue with the trade as traditionally and historically been helpful for them. Second is the fear of differing the opinions, especially on Gaza, because we believe that the interview that he had with Benjamin Netanyahu very recently then showed the extent to which Trump is radical, building new homes outside of Gaza so that they can force Gazans to live out, let even Israeli ministers to disagree with Trump. So this leads to the ability for European ministers, especially right incumbents, to also then say maybe Trump is going a bit too far with this, which means that the fear of having these differing opinions, especially in issues like Gaza, is something that will affect protection policies. It will likely affect countries in Europe. Third thing here then is Trump's tendency to cater best towards America's interests only. This is very obvious because his campaign was literally to make America great again, not to make the world great again. We don't believe that these are America's interests to be able to cater best and help European countries then. Before I move on to my second question in this debate about how it blocks out WHO and climate change efforts, I'll take that point. 3, 2, 1. All right, cool. Second question I'm going to answer in this debate is, what are the effects of Trump blocking out of the WHO and climate change efforts? We need to note that the current way and the current executive changes that Trump has introduced within America post his election is one that blocked America out of WHO and the climate change efforts. We're going to take this a bit further and say that the extent to which this happens, it means that since America is a big powerhouse of money, it means that all the resources are not going to be poured into helping these sorts of efforts to be able to develop. It means that acknowledging that they've already once before catered towards them with the Liberal Party or with things like, for instance, Joe Biden or Barack Obama, we believe that these are all ways in which it will affect the total amount that will be pushed and channeled into the WHO and climate change efforts, which means that it will affect things like disease control, like the ability for children to be able to survive, like the spread of HIV, and like the spread of AIDS. These are all things that can happen medically, but through through environmentally, it things like rising sea levels, like helping the Amazon, like helping things like making sure that that carbon emissions are controlled. These are all things that will affect the way in which that people live. So it means that it will drastically affect the way in which the world is affected, and therefore, since if it affects humans, it also then affects European white ring incumbents. So these are things that we don't think aligns with the interest of them because they need to survive. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, it is also then leads to these incumbents having to spend more money within the country to be able to cater towards these issues. Is something that we don't want, ladies and gentlemen. For all these reasons, there are so many harms towards it. We do not want to cater towards this. So proud to oppose.
Thank you for that speech. Calling on member of Gov, you're here. MG,
Hello everyone, am I audible?
loud and clear.
Okay, let me set up my timer first. Okay, ending my speech in 3, 2, 1. Trump's election has made an impact on the European right-wing incumbents to boldly pursue their nationalism and therefore elevating his success as a cry for anti-immigration and protectionist policies that resonate deeply with voters across the continent. But before I begin my speech, I would like to call out first the flaws of each house from opening gov to closing off. In the opening government, they talked about why Trump's policies will be far right, and that includes like being against abortion, all for nationalism and protection, and they also describe him as a far right person. But then they're not clear on the importance of these policies with lack of mechanisms on how they look like, and therefore that is the reason why they cannot win because of their lack of characterization and illustration as well with their examples, which we will do later in our speech to win over them. But as for the opening opposition, off comes into the debate and poses their strong arm argument. The people will lose the election. This fails to realize that heavy radical right-wing leaders already exist in the countries such as Switzerland, Italy, Germany, and they don't address this at all, focusing instead in countries with weak right-wing politicians. But this then fails to realize as well that these weak right-wing politicians, his entire speech hinges on failing that having been failing for the longest time, right? A framing error on their end is assuming that the European has been right-leaning, but they have been left-leaning for a while now, and thus these weak right-wing politicians are symmetrically more likely to lose on both sides of the debate. Thus, this renders the replacement argument fallible because why haven't they been replaced yet if that is the case, right? For the longest time, these right-wing parties have been losing, but these weak parties continue to exist. If this is symmetric, then the benefit we are then able to get is to give these people a better chance if they're more likely to lose regardless. At least on our world, they're able to take advantage of the benefits of Trump's position, which we will go over now. What are the interests of the European right-wing incumbents? Trump's interests are in managing the economy of the United States and generating profit while also driving out illegal immigrants. And Europe's policy is more on average conservative values, right, with an emphasis on economy. But what sets us apart from OG is that we will present deeper mechanisms and impacts on the policies of Trump and also delineate by focusing on the economic impact. In closing government, we will prove to you how Trump caters to economic protectionism, anti-immigration, and also differentiate nationalism versus globalism. But first, we delineate from OG by providing our economic push and tying it into the voter maintenance. Not just turn out because these people are already in parliament, but can be characterized as people who want to stay support in parliamentary. As for first argument, economic gain in the European. Trump is all about the economy of America first above centuries, above our countries. We already know that. This aligns perfectly with the Europeans' right-wing values on strengthening and emboldening the country. His approach greatly emphasizes domestic job creation besides protecting the local industries, which then aligns with the European right-wing's interests. Since they want policies that would also boost like domestic markets and also protect local jobs from foreign competition. And therefore, secondly, Trump's protectionism also aligns with the voters' anxiety when it comes to globalization, and therefore European right wing can then advocate for the same policies in protecting the economies, especially local. And why is that likely? Because many people feel that their livelihoods are threatened by economic policies that prioritize multinational companies over local businesses, and the impact that brings that it causes fear among the electorate regarding stability. And as for the European right wing incumbents, then they can also do the same protection measures. Let's say, for example, on tariffs on imported goods, etc. And that can also like appeal to the voters who can yearn for economic security. And by showing this benefit from us, we can also appeal to the authority. And the impact then is that we will be able to have like, more opportunity for these leaders to present themselves as protectors of the national interest when they show importance in protecting our local industries. And therefore, in the long run, we cater to the voters' interest for economic security that can also affect policy decisions for in the next years to come. And then number three, this then looks like economic turnout, at least within the country, increasing. Try to be in the short term, allowing for more votes while also improving the country's state as a whole. Why do we want to make an emphasis on this? Simply because not only does it give solutions for the voters' anxiety, but it also benefits these politicians who will be prepared to protect their interests against external threats. Now we'll move to the extension of voter turnout through two separate deep arguments by going over specific policies. As for a second argument then, nationalism versus globalism on the European stage. Three layers of analysis then. Number one, when it comes to problems, the problem in the EU is that currently it is more on catering to other countries, expanding its influence through soft power and the like, where these voters then for right-wing politicians who are more on national centrism, wherein it is the country, not us, the EU. When Trump is then able to show that nationalism from one of the biggest superpowers in the world is what works, it is able to give these right wing politicians ammunition for what is seemingly an intuitive concept to a lot of undecided voters. When these undecided see that the right is mimicking the national policy of Donald Trump, it appeals to their connection to their country while also being able to cater towards the appeal to authority that is the big US. It allows them to safely buy into these pushes by the right, and that
Anda.
the bigger voter turnout for these right-wing party members. And why is that substantial then? It is because at the end of the day, it is about getting people to buy into your cause. And when you're able to take these undecided voters and show them a sense of support, comfort, you're more likely to call the benefits from the US. It also, secondly, allows closer, almost decided voters that final
Anda.
push over the edge when they see a big authority thriving with the same policies as their preferred candidate, right? And number three, it may not be the best situation for these EU right wingers, but that doesn't mean that they can take pre-decided voters and then taking the swing voters is what likely ultimately wins these elections, right? So when you're able to do that, even in small ways, this is more than enough to justify our side. And we delineate with the negative argument simply by stating OO's case doesn't matter. OO says these lesser right-wing movement people will lose, being replaced by more radical right-wing movement politicians. First, we prove that this isn't the case, and thus people will still keep running and run well as right-wing ideology is spreading, which is completely against what OO tries to posit. On your entire case is only valid as long as the hinge that is less right-wing politicians do fail and the real life facts say they don't. Countries such as Switzerland, Sweden, Italy, originally left-leaning, are already very recently right-leaning, simply proving their case wrong through real-life examples. These are done by non-radical right, simply right-leaning, disproving their arguments from the get-go, invalidating them. And therefore, the preemption that is that Gov may say that European right-wing are more likely to dissociate with America given Trump's individualistic policy. But that is not the case then, because on a micro scale, we create solutions that not only address economic fears of the voters, as I said earlier, but we also cater to the politicians who can strengthen their like leadership and capital within the electorate. And therefore, that is because of the resulted by protectionism. And therefore, we are able to create more benefits on our side that makes this round winning. But on a macro scale, Trump's election significantly benefits the European right-wing incumbents, providing them with sure, we already provided of the important arguments better than the opening government and also mechanisms and comparative impacts that makes us better than the opposition.
Thank you for
That
that.
makes us win.
Thank
That
you
is
for thank you for that speech. Calling on MO. You're here.
Am I audible?
Loud and clear.
Okay, I'll be having to Iron Man because my teammate had to leave due to some personal issues. So Bokhtiar will be giving both speeches. With that being said, just give me a few seconds. starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. Understand, panel, that all the three houses have already failed in their primary burden of this debate. Why? Because the burdens they took each were very significantly high. One, OG tried to prove that why exactly Trump coming in is a good thing and how this actually aligns with the ideological priorities or the ideological decision making that Europe as a continent wants to take, or right-wing European incumbents want to take. We'll be disproving that directly in our integrated rebuttal. But secondly, why is it that we're going to be distincting? Where is it that we're going to be distincting ourselves from O? O told you what are the things that are likely to happen without any forms of particular analysis as to why these outcomes are most likely. What we're going to do from CEO, from the member, is we're going to give you impacts that are based on retrospective causal analysis in order to ensure that the outcomes themselves are more likely, or the likeliness of the outcome is significantly higher on CEO, thus giving us the clear win on why these impacts are more likely to realize on our side of the house as compared to O. But why is it that this particular idea is going to take down CG as well? To understand, most of what CG says is dependent on the fact that Trump is a good actor for Europe, but if when the moment in time we go into this retrospective causal analysis where we'll be using Trump's previous term to categorize and see that how it has affected Europe as a whole, that's the very point in time we're going to show you the counterfactuals that are already present in the past and how they're going to get exponentially worse in the future, thus giving us the edge over CG as well. Moving on to the arguments. Number one, we're going to be giving you four particular structural reasonings as to why we believe that right-wing leaders are actually, right-wing incumbents are going to be harmed. One, Trump's first election already harmed right-wing European leaders in terms of situations where he already gave sanctions, he already initiated trade wars with different European partners, and he even made certain attempts in order to take on in order to put Europe in a situation where Europe had to bow down to him. Why is this significant? Why is this important? Because understand, the very moment in time you're coming for a second election as the right-wing incumbent, your primary focus is on three particular things. One, economic growth, stability of security of your region or your particular country, but most importantly, your electoral unity. And all of these things are going to get screwed over by Donald Trump the minute in time he gets power. But most biggest particular factor is the fact that how his entire idea, where exactly are the impacts going to happen. One, we're going to see major economic disruptions on macroeconomic levels where the entire European economy is likely to get crippled or likely to take significant damages. Two, we're going to see electoral fracturing where Trump's right-wing propaganda or right-wing pushing will actually end up emboldening the radical factions that exist within European. It doesn't matter if there's not that much right-wing factionalization within Europe right now. If Europe isn't that right-wing, right-wing itself, like any other political ideology, has spectrums. There's a soft right, there's a far right, there's a centrist right. What this essentially means is Trump coming in is going to fracture these particular right-wing divisions or make more fragmentations within the right-wing, which is going to create electoral fracturing. But most important two sectors is the fact that there's going to be significant amount of domestic and international crisis because Trump already has history of pushing national parties, into no-win political situations where they have to make a decision that caters to Trump's ideas or Trump's agendas rather than focusing on their own national development or their own national goals. And Trump already backing out of various international treaties like NATO, like Paris Agreement, already put a lot of European countries regarding their future vision, like future security measures and future economic output. But most importantly, the entire future ecosystem of Europe at risk already, meaning there's going to be significant international and security risks as well. What are these consequences going to look like? We believe in terms of macroeconomic consequences, the right-wing European countries have a significant stake on their economies, right? Irrespective of whether or not Trump goes into high protectionism or low protectionism, Trump's protectionist policies, where he initiates trade wars, tariffs, and other forms of active aspects, other forms of active economic strategies in order to ensure that US's economy gets to thrive or US's economy gets better, is the very point in time where European industries start to lose out. Why? Because understand this, last term, Trump damaged Germany's auto manufacturers, something which was virtually impossible before Trump actually pushed in his protectionist policies. What this means is he completely dismantled a key sector of European economy of Germany just because he wanted protectionist policies of making American cars, which in turn facilitated Tesla. USA got a good alternative, but Europe lost a significant amount of revenue from this particular action. But secondly, we believe that there's significant amounts of currency instability as as well. What this currency stability looks like is Trump always tries to play with US dollar fluctuations in order to make sure that his economy or his trade is maximized or US's trade is maximized. We believe at the very point in time these USD fluctuations happen since the entire Europe follows a single currency model or follows the Eurozone model. It's at the very point in time Europe's economy or entire Europe's economy starts to fluctuate as well, because Europe's economy in turn is dependent on the dollarization system, right, or on the dollar ecosystem. What this fluctuation does is it creates a currency instability which causes significant harm on European trade stability as a whole. And this was directly seen when this trade instability weakened Le Pen's base regarding wine and dairy tariffs, because she could not trade, and these fluctuating currencies made it almost impossible for her to make sure that there's a proper pricing of the wine that she's trying to sell. Impact. We believe that there's two impacts of this particular argument. One, right-wing nationalist leaders struggle to deliver on their economic security, but more importantly, they lose out on a lot of middle-class conservative voters who focus on like these economic outputs, making Fiji's case of the fact that these right-wing elections, there's going to be a transition of power much more important, because these right-wing incumbents want to come into power, and Trump's policies are likely to put them in a situation where they're going to lose out on the re-election. Second thing, and the most important one, is the electoral fracturization within Trump's idea. Understand that Trump fractionalizes the entire right-wing idea, or fractionalizes the entire right-wing situation, right? What this looks like is Trump using pitting Francis Le Pen and Zemmour against each other, because one has more radical outcomes or more radicalized idea that is similar to Trump, versus one has a more centrist right-wing approach. Again, it might be the same for Germany's AfD and CDU right-wing blocs, which both belong to different right fractions, right? What this does is this creates a fracture within the national political spectrum of a side that was previously united, and directly damages the bipartisan nature of politics itself. What are the impacts of this? We believe that this directly harms right-wing incumbents on two layers. One, right-wing leaders need to choose electoral strength, but they lose out on electoral strength because of the fact that there's a dissonance going on within their parties because of this fractionalization. But more importantly, if they go in to solve this problem and try to solve it by choosing one side, where they either alienate Trump or rejecting Trump, they're either going to lose out on one particular portion of their significant voter base. If they accept Trump, it's going to be the moderates. If they reject Trump, it's going to be the far-right voters who are their most loyal supporters. This in turn leads to a situation where these countries are in a lose-lose situation. Further comparatives will be delivered by Upwith. Very proud purpose.
Thank you for that speech. Calling on Gov Whip, you're here.
Hello, I am Government Whip Josiah on Ente, POIs through voice. I will be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. When war comes, a smart man takes advantage and sells the guns that fuel it. Despite the possible harms of Donald Trump's candidacy, we posit that this is actually a benefit, and that these parliamentary members will be able to take advantage of a seemingly uncharitable situation at first glance. Now, as Whip, I will go over the clashes of this debate. I will respond to each house accordingly, and finally, extensions and why we win. Now, first on clashes, right? What is the interest of the European Union right wings and how they align with Donald Trump? We are able to acknowledge this first class with the lapse in opening gov, because they release all these arguments while never acknowledging, one, the nuance of EU's right-wing parties, going so far as to concede a point on Donald Trump as well, that this is simply uncharitable. We come in and posit the nuance of the EU, showing different perspectives like Switzerland, like Germany, etc., which were never talked about by any other bench. EU is outward, right? Europe is outward, etc. And even if it doesn't include things like Germany, even if it is just in the European Union, we are able to posit, right? Things like Switzerland, things like Italy, etc., that have bought into this, and how they are continuously shifting towards the right, which is why we are able to identify the interest of European right-wing countries and how they align with Donald Trump. Is Trump heavily right-leaning, right? That was a big deadlock on opening. We then completely shut this deadlock down by arguing on the basis of Trump's objective policy, what he's done, not his current ideals, because we charitably concede that we cannot be characterized as simply, and thus we are taking advantage of what he's done before and putting it in the lens of what is happening now. Thus, we are able to delineate from this in a way that is substantial. Will right-wing parties be able to take advantage, or will they falter? Right? This is the third clash. This is essentially what this debate is about, and thus we engage this head-on on arguing the hard line on how votes are able to be attained, instead of running a flimsy delineative in a way that is substantive, in a way that provides big mechanisms. Instead, we delineate via our negative argument, which allows us wiggle room while also providing a lot of opening governments and unsubstantiated claims. Because opening government never put a negative, they only focused on the positives of their side, which were unsubstantiated in the first place. Let's go house to house first and prove why the other team's arguments are untrue. Let's start with opening gov. Opening gov spends a lot of time characterizing Donald Trump while not characterizing the EU right parliamentary at all. The case they posit is able to have substance when we co-opt it, simply positing a surface level argument without any substantive. They simply claim, hey, Donald Trump is big, thus right wing will be big too. And when they provide things such as economic policy and the like, they are never able to go deep on this in a way that is substantive, which we are able to catch onto. We are then able to catch onto their falter by justifying why, with specific policy, they're also able to take on, while also being able to take on the characterization of the nuances of the EU with contrasting countries like Russia, like France. Right? We are then able to delineate by giving specific examples and going deeper into economic policy and the like. Going deeper, sure, they release arguments, but it's like releasing a balloon into the wind with no tether. What we are able to do is provide the tether, provide the mechanisms to prove it, while also giving another balloon as well, the negative argument. We then provide the neg arguments they fail to, showing why opposition's world is bad when they were never able to do this, locking out all of the possible benefits that came with negative arguments, which is why you must give us the vote over OG, and also why I must clarify when they said why Trump's policies will be far right. He's against abortion, all for nationalism and protectionism, far right person. But they never say the importance of these policies with lack of mechanisms on how they look like, lack of characterization and illustration with their examples, which is we did through our speech. Then comes into this debate and tries to posit their strong arm argument. The people will lose the election, and these people will lose the election and lose the election hard, allowing for more radical right to come in. This fails to realize that heavy radical right-wing leaders already exist in countries such as Switzerland, Italy, Germany, and they don't address this at all, focusing instead in countries with weak right-wing politicians. That's why their case hinges on. But then this fails to realize as well that these weak right-wing politicians, his entire speech hinges on failing, have failed, right? Let's concede they have failed before and have been failing for the longest time. A framing error on their end is assuming that EU has been right-leaning, but they have been left-leaning for a while now. And thus when these weak right-wing policies are symmetrically more likely to lose, we are then able to co-opt the benefit of giving them a chance, right? As my first speaker stated before, this renders their replacement argument fallible because why haven't they been replaced yet, right? On OO, your entire case is only valid as long as the hinge is that the lesser right-wing politicians do fail. And the real-life facts say that they don't. Countries such as Switzerland, Sweden, Italy, originally left-leaning, are already very recently right-leaning, simply proving their case wrong through real-life example. They then talk about the effects of Trump's election at EU, but this is arguing on the basis of EU benefit, not what the benefits the right-wing parties. They never tie this harm back to right-wing parties, only positing this by virtue of association, but never mechanize on how world policy affects this specifically. This effectively locks them out of this benefit. Closing opposition then comes in, banging out arguments that don't have any weight. Right-wing incumbents are unable to engage because Donald Trump policy screws up plans. But we simply prove this wrong through our speech. Let's extend on my first speaker's point on radicalizing voters through any means necessary. We are simply able to say that what matters is not what's beneficial to voters, it is what they perceive as beneficial. This is a very intuitive extension. Thus, any harms on the voters themselves are negligible as long as we are able to spin this and to benefit us. This can be very easily done by positing these harms as the path to change. This has been done before and has been done to radicalize for the longest time. Two benefits then. We are able to shift the blame outward and we are able to show substantive impact on our policies because they can see that people will notice, right? They will notice the harms put against them. But we can simply say that these are growing pains to a better nation, thus being able to co-opt the votes that are more likely to come to us either way, right? Which this eventually aids us because we are able to show substantive impact to already radicalized voters. Any harm on the people are actually flipped as benefits because it shows impact, allowing to take radicalized voters. Trump's approach to foreign policy aligns with the goals of many right-wing policies in Europe. This alignment empowers incumbents who aim to pursue more independent national strategies. By supporting Trump's administration, European right-wing leaders can enforce their own positions against what they think as an overreach from Brussels, etc., etc. These are our points. Now let's go over weighing and comparative. Why our case wins. Arguments. We are able to better mechanize an economic alignment in ideologies. Keyword better here. Trump's strategies and values aligning with EU's interests make us win over opposition, given the very fact that there would be a reduction to globalism. We are able to differentiate nationalism and globalism better, and we are able to have a negative argument that is substantive and shuts down both sides of this debate, while also acknowledging the extension now that closing opposition shifts the paradigm. Why is this round winning? On impact first, on a micro level, Trump's elections can strengthen right-wing movements across Europe, thus providing them with incentive to challenge traditional political systems. Trump focuses on prioritizing America's alliance with the EU's interests, which could lead to increased cooperation among these leaders. Local politicians can also implement protectionism measures, such as tariffs on imported goods, addressing voter concerns. These are addressing voter concerns. These are very intuitive extensions. On a macro level, economic nationalism may reshape Europe's trade relationships, potentially leading to a better approach to globalization and trade agreements. Conclusion. With all of this being said, we have proven why we are better than opening half, why we are better than closing, and for all of these reasons, we are more proud to oppose.
Thank you for that speech. Calling on Upwhip, here.
Am I audible?
Loud and clear.
Okay, just give me a few seconds. Starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. Understand that the biggest problem with CG is the fact that they assume that Trump is going to be an actor who's going to actively look out for Europe's benefits or Europe's positive outcomes. We don't believe that Trump as an actor or as a political entity is someone who cares about anyone other than America. But more importantly, even within his previous administration, Trump has proven time and time again that he only cares about himself and he only cares about what he himself as an actor wants to do. We saw this in the situations where Trump was almost like in a situation where he was going to get impeached, but even after that, he literally called out or led an attack to democracy. And after the attack of democracy fiasco, this individual, who's literally a man of a beast, decided to run from the Republican base again, secured the election, and ended up getting re-elected even after all these fiascos. What does this entire analysis prove to you? This entire analysis proves to you that Trump is simply not an actor that you as an individual can predict to be a positive actor as long as he's going after something that he wants. What is it that Trump wants in this particular term? We believe that unlike the previous term where Trump had to worry about re-election, this is not a term where Trump has to worry about re-election. Because understand that in this particular situation, Trump is already on his second term. He's literally going to go crazy and do whatever the shit and whatever the fuck he wants. Why is this significantly important? Because it brings us to the key tipping point of this debate, right? Does Trump look like an actor who is going to cater to Europe? The answer is no. This entire situation where Trump is going into his new term isn't a situation where Trump is likely to replay the actions that he did. This time he's going to be more unhinged, more radical, and more vengeful because he no longer has electoral incentives. He's literally going to show his natural behavior, and he does not give a shit if he's impeached because that almost happened last time and they couldn't put a scratch on him. What this essentially means is every single European incentive or the benefits of this European right-wing income comes into question and comes under uncertainty, meaning uncertainty in itself, considering that you're going for a re-election in the next particular term, is something that is very, very significant because in this situation, this uncertainty itself is something that does not serve your interest, especially when it comes to electoral decision making. Meaning on the primary level, it's already not in their interest. But what are the impacts that are going to happen? We believe that the impacts that we already told you about are likely to happen, where economic instability is going to rise, where electoral fracturing is likely to happen, and there's going to be significant governance paralysis and security weaknesses. Why are these likely things to happen? One, we already tell you in our first speech that how, in the case of Trump, how Europe's entire economic credibility or economic trade ecosystem is suffering significantly due to Trump's protectionism, right? Because understand that Trump's economic policies are significantly interlinked with the EU, because one of the major markets of the European Union is USA or the American is USA. Why this is important? Because understand that Trump's protectionist policies restrict entrance of European products within US's market. What this essentially does is it makes a trade disruption and a trade shock for Europe as a whole. And European Union, since it works like a single trade unit, the entire economies are shared. What this essentially means is if you're fucking over Germany's automobile industry or fucking over France's wine industry, it's at a very particular moment you're fucking over most of Europe, if not all of Europe. But secondly, we believe that the second most important problem here is that right right-wing votes are likely to get fractured to the point where leftists are going to end up winning. Because Trump is someone who emboldens extremes, right? Imagine in a situation in the past few years, Europe was right-wing incumbents in Europe have been able to secure victories because of the fact that they were all functioning as the right-wing spectrum and did not look into the fractionalization that existed within the right wing or the fractions that exist within the right wing. Since Trump emboldens extremes and tells them or pushes them or advocates for their power, these extreme right-wing situations are right-wing individuals or right-wing extreme right within the right-wing spectrum are more likely to get emboldened and try to take benefits of the entire situation or likely to go rampant out of control. What essentially means is that in this scenario, the entire right-wing voter base is going to be significantly fractured, divided, and which is going to likely create a scenario where they will be vulnerable to the left-wing voter base in upcoming elections, thus giving their wins or their ability to influence policy making as a whole under question. But lastly, we believe but the biggest problem that Europe needs to worry about, especially after Russia, is the fact that NATO being at full strength, right? Because understand, Trump in his last term considered significant demilitarization, and he already significantly demilitarized US, right? You saw demilitarization in a lot of aspects, like in terms of Afghanistan or pulling back troops from all over the world. Trump also wanted to pull out of NATO, but his term ended before he could. This second term is literally putting NATO at risk, which is your entire security mechanism, considering that Russia is sitting right above your head in the European map. What this essentially means is you're putting yourself in the most vulnerable position where constant threat of Trump going out of NATO or Trump leaving NATO if he demands or if you don't act on his own whim. Meaning, this entire situation leads to three particular problems. One, loss of autonomy of the entire European incumbents. Two, significant potential risks that actually create them or put them in a situation where they're no longer able to look out for their own interests. But three, we believe it violates every single principal output and consequential output that these European right-wing incumbents want to achieve. What are the comparatives and why is it that we believe that we win this debate? We believe that we win this debate on four comparatives. One, economic stability. We already show you that why Trump does not empower national economies or why Trump does not actually help strengthening the European economy, but rather Trump's trade war, tariff wars, and his different forms of protectionist measures actually end up harming European economics and European economy and destroy the legitimacy of significant industries. But secondly, we don't believe that if Trump brings any second reason, we believe Trump does not bring any electoral benefit within Europe. Trump does not boost national movements or radical movements. Rather, he creates factionalizations within parties, which significantly destroys the overall political standings of particular countries. Third, we believe that Trump completely destroys domestic and security positioning or strategies of a country, where Trump continuously forces them into situations where his wishes or how he wants to see it is something that needs to be given or that needs to be catered to. The fine line. Why is it that we believe we win this debate? We win this debate for three particular major metrics. One, we tell you that Trump's major second term is not going to be a repeat or a replay. We tell you that this is going to be exponentially worse, where a lot of the impacts which were there the previous time are going to get far, far worse because of the fact that there's no check and balance mechanism to put Trump out. But secondly, we tell you that national leaders and national economies don't get their interests met and they're forced into situations where they're going to constantly have to battle crisis. But last of all, we believe we show to you a comprehensive analysis as to why all these outcomes are likely with proper mechanisms and causality. For all these reasons, votes you.
Thank you for that wonderful speech, Pip. And now to officially close the debate, you may now cross the house. Please do note that this is a silent round. There will be no OA, so you can leave right after. Thank you.